for this conference. So the planning committee includes Sandy Friedman, who is my co-chair. It includes Nabila Hijazi, Carolyn Smith, Philip Troutman, Niles Tomlinson, Rachel Pollack, Zachary Wolf, and Gordon Mantler. So then also a big special thanks to Andy Fishburne, and especially to our wonderful moderators who are volunteering their time and expertise to support undergraduate research at GW. So thank you to you all and to our student presenters as well. And with that, I'll turn things over to Dr. Natalie Houghtby-Haddon, the moderator of our first session.
Thank you so much, Professor Richter, and it is really a pleasure for me to be with you all tonight and to have the honor of listening to these three talented scholars. The title of our session is Visible Hands, Unexpected Results of Economic Intervention, and the summaries of each of the papers that we'll be hearing are just really exciting and really interesting. So I'm excited to hear what our presenters have to say. A little bit about them. Our first presenter for the evening will be Robert Ballsrud. He's a sophomore studying international affairs and is from Minnesota. Parker Seeley is our second presenter for the evening, and she is double majoring in finance and economics, and she's from Austin, Texas originally. On campus, she's involved in the George Washington Women in Business as the DC TREC director and is also the vice president of operations for Women in Finance. In her free time, beyond studying and participating in those organizations, she likes to go on runs and visit new coffee shops. And then our third presenter is Priscila Leon. And she's a sophomore majoring in international business with a concentration in sports management. And while she aspires to build a career in the sports industry, she is also a passionate advocate for issues related to fast fashion and the promotion of non-GMO seeds and sustainable agricultural practices. And Priscila is from Puerto Rico. So three very interesting presenters with three very interesting papers that they will be presenting. The plan for the evening is that we'll hear each of the three presenters, and then we will have time for question and answer. And so we'll recognize the questions as you have them. So with that, I think it's time to have our first presenter move ahead. So Robert, may we call on you?
Yeah, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
I'll take that as yes. Perfect. Let me just get my presentation ready. And hopefully you can see it okay, correct?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Well, then I'll start and I'll try to keep it under 10 minutes. So for my university writing class, I was in Professor Janzen's class. It dealt with money and markets. That's what we focused on. And then my topic was on SEZs, special economic zones in the Philippines. For those who don't know, special economic zones are typically a geographical area that a country or state will create that has economic incentives. Oftentimes the aim is to drive business and economic development. So there might be, tax incentives to encourage, foreign businesses to come. So initially, when I started to conduct my research, I knew I wanted to do something around special economic zones. So I kind of started looking at China and their Shenzhen SEZ, which really was it wasn't the first SEZ, but it really gave birth to the modern movement of it. Pre-1980, pre-1980, the population of Shenzhen was under 100,000, but then it grew to over 20 million. The economy grew by over a factor of 2,000, not 2,000%, but a factor. Now there's thousands of special economic zones all over the world. But then doing my reading, I also read that, economic development hasn't been equal in China. So the east coast of China's GDP is close to 2 times greater the rest of China, whether that be the north or more the inland areas. And so I wanted to focus my research on China, but that wasn't really a possibility because there wasn't a lot of data available, and a lot of it wasn't easily accessible in the English language. So kind of tying into my further research and kind of what led into my literature review was some of the other research I found on SEZs. So generally, there was research that talked about how their economic impacts seemed to be quite limited in how far it dispersed, only to around 20 kilometers outside of the special economic zone. And then specifically the Philippines, which is what I chose to focus on, and I'll touch on that in a second. The economic, like the overall economic benefit seemed to be beneficial, but there was questions from certain researchers if it kind of bred a wealthy class, I think is the word they used. If there were people who were benefiting more than others, and it was really helping just, further enhance the wealthy. But then one of the most interesting research papers I read for my literature review, or a few of them I read, I believe there's 3 total, talked about the varied economic results of special economic zones. So I believe one dealt with Tanzania and one dealt with Poland, if I remember correctly. And they kind of talked about how special economic zones won't always work if you have politicians or officials who decide to take rents, if they are corrupt. This oftentimes has an impact on special economic zones. But at the same time, if they are ran well, they could be extremely, extremely successful. So it was kind of like interesting to kind of hear that, how the development really had an impact.
Quebec is in Canada. Quebec is in Canada. It's the big one. Quebec is in Canada.
Let me remind you to make sure that your mics are on mute if you're one of the participants, and that way we'll be able to hear and not disrupt our presenter. So Robert, keep going. Thank you.
Oh, no worries, no worries. So I kind of found my crack in the sidewalk, I believe is something my professor said. So I decided to look at the Philippines specifically, and I'll get into it in a second, but their data was widely available, recent data, and it was in English. So it was widely accessible to me, and it was a distinct geographical area. As I talked about earlier, the economic impacts seem to be different, especially in different countries. Maybe one country politicians are often taking rents. Maybe they don't have a stable electric grid. So I really focused on one country, which helped with the research. And that kind of led to my research question on how's the density of special economic zones at Providence region, highly urbanized areas, population in the Philippines affect family household income. And I used this wide geographical whether it be Providence region, because that's how the data was broken down. But for the general gist of it, I looked at it by these geographical units. Yeah, so getting into it, I kind of going to now focus on what my research really did. So I actually did a statistical analysis, being that it was a money and markets class. I did a Pearson's correlation coefficient test, which is actually a pretty simple test. Some people might know it from, a more intro level statistics class. But this gets into the 3 data sets I used. So the first data set was from the Philippines Economic Zone Authority SEZ list. So this lists out every single every single special economic zone they have is about 400, and in what area they are in. So I paired this this list with census data from the Philippine Statistic Authority from 2020. And basically all I did was took the population in any one of these areas. So I might look at a Providence and say the population is, 1 million, and then they have 5 SEZs, and I divide those to, find the density. And I believe I standardize it, density per 1,000 people. And then I took that data and I then used the Philippine Statistics Authority's income data. And I paired those 2 together, and I used some online software to then run a Pearson's correlation coefficient. So basically looking at, are these 2 data points correlated? And a big thing I did was that I looked at not only the average income, but also the average income by each income decile. So the average income of the bottom 10% of earners, and the average income for households, average income of households versus, the top 10% average income of households, to really see if the benefits were equal, or certain earners who made more or less were benefiting more. And just to explain the Pearson's correlation coefficient, so it ranges between -1 to 1. 0 means there's no correlation. If it's negative, that means that there's a negative correlation. If it's positive, that means there's a positive correlation. And a 1 would mean that the correlation is perfect. So you can kind of see it here. So if you had, take the example here, a positive correlation would mean that, as the density of special economic zones increases with population, then generally you'll see an increase in family household income. And that's actually what I found. So here are my results. Again, I have all the income deciles. So that kind of looks at, each group. So the bottom 10% of earners, the bottom, it kind of goes like that, the top 10% of earners and all those deciles in between, and then average income. So every single one was both a moderate and positive correlation, showing that there is a correlation between the density of special economic zones by population and household income at all decile levels. And it was all statistically significant. So this was really interesting. I do want to highlight that, of course, this is a correlation, not causation. There could very well be another magical factor that is causing this, but nevertheless, there is a correlation between these two factors, which kind of gets into like my results and everything. But I'll actually touch on the limitations part of this first, and then get into the implications of it all. So as I discussed before, there could be other factors at play. It's a correlation, not causation. We live in a world where there's so many different factors that could be affecting it. So who knows what could be affecting it, but yeah. And then next, it doesn't account for where the special economic zones are. So let's pretend, we live in DC. Let's pretend all the special economic zones were in the top right-hand corner, top north corner of DC, versus a DC where the special economic zones are evenly distributed throughout. It doesn't account for that difference, which, as I mentioned in previous research, usually it only disperses so far. So that could definitely be a factor, and it's a limitation that I couldn't account for that. Another limitation was I wasn't able to control for, this size of the SEZ, not necessarily geographical, but perhaps economic. The special economic zone brings in $500 million versus $2 billion in economic benefits. Those are just random numbers. They'd be considered the same in this research. And then, of course, language. I do not speak Filipino. I was not able to do field research, and nor am I an expert in anything regarding the Philippines. I'm not an expert in their economy or anything. So clearly that also limits the type of research I'm able to do. Nevertheless, I do think there is some critical implications. I think it could indicate to policymakers that they should do further research, and they should look into how special economic zones can help them in the future. And specifically, as I discussed earlier, a lot of research has dealt with the economic implications, but less so at the household level, which is something that I looked at. So specifically, if we have one area where households are struggling financially, could building a special economic zone or increasing the density of them in that area bring, good economic impacts to that community and those households? That's definitely a question. And that ties into, the idea of economic policy making. And then a big thing, again, was that the distribution of benefits seem to be roughly equal, indicating that special economic zones might, probably, again, it's a correlation, don't just help the wealthy, but help all people. And again, that's just somewhere where further research can be done. And of course, further research can be done outside of the Philippines in all sorts of countries. So yeah, that is the gist of my research. And I appreciate everyone at the conference committee and everyone helping run this for giving the time for me to present. And I appreciate everyone for listening. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Let's give Robert a round of applause, yay. And so we appreciate your presentation and the information that you've given us. So lots of interesting things. It would be interesting to think about how hub zones in the US kind of match that in other places. Parker, are you ready to present your research to us?
Yes, I am. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. All right, so in my UW class, our topic was risk communication, and I specifically chose this dollar store invasion across America and the lack of risk communication in the communities these dollar stores are affecting. The problem of my project is that dollar stores are flooding small and vulnerable communities. So when I say the dollar store invasion, what does this mean? Well, this means the rapid and disproportionate spread of dollar stores in low-income, rural, and urban communities. The main dollar stores that we see out here in America are Dollar General, Dollar Trees, and then you might have heard of like Family Dollar that's owned by Dollar Tree. But as of 2024, there were over 38,000 of these dollar stores. This is more than any other retail store, so more than your Target, more than your Walmart. This is quite a big number. And these stores are targeting small populations and have a disproportionate number of dollar stores. If we look at Dallas, Texas, while that's not a small community, there are small communities within Dallas, so like suburbs. We see the disproportionate spread of these stores. So dollar stores are rapidly expanding. There's over 250 for these stores in Dallas alone, and there's over 3,000 in Texas. They are concentrating low-income neighborhood and communities. And the city manager of Mesquite, which is a suburb in Dallas, even said that a high concentration of these dollar stores is detrimental to long-term development of our neighborhoods and hinders efforts to attract full-service grocery stores. So why do we care about these dollar stores that are invading our communities? Well, they are creating food insecurity, hurt local businesses, and are increasing crime rates. So for harm to local grocers, when a dollar store comes to the community, the grocers are 2.3% more likely to close, and they see up to 5.7 lower sales. And also 1 in 20 independent grocers will shut down. We see other stores close as well. Maybe this is a clothing store or a pharmacy, as now the dollar store can offer the same products for a cheaper price. We also see increased crime rates when dollar stores come to the communities. A Georgia sheriff even called these dollar stores stop and robs. And in 2019, Dollar General stores accounted for over 25% of commercial robberies in Dayton, Ohio. This earned them the label robbery magnets. And why these dollar stores are so easy to rob is because they're low security. There's maybe 1 to 2 people working, and the workers normally don't care about the merchandise because the merchandise is so cheap. And then also these dollar stores, there's a lack of healthy food. So you walk into these dollar stores, you're not going to see fresh fruit, vegetables, milk, cheese. This contributes to food deserts and poor health outcomes, as you're mostly seeing heavily processed food, and this can contribute to childhood obesity. Now, obviously, when doing my project, I couldn't look at America as a whole, so I had to narrow it down to a specific town that this dollar store invasion is affecting. So I chose a town a little closer to my heart. I chose Chama, New Mexico. This is where my grandparents have lived for the past 20 years. Chama is a town of about 900 people, and they have 4 dollar stores within a 20-mile radius. And earlier this year in February, the city council approved the permit for a brand new Dollar General site. And as you can see in this picture, they already have a current Family Dollar, and this new Dollar General is going to be a 1-minute drive away from the existing one. And the Dollar General store promised the residents, oh, we're going to bring in new jobs. And this is just confusing, as the 3 other stores in town already have staffing issues, as there's not enough people who want or are able to fill these jobs. So this leads residents to ask, why do we need another store? Now, I initially expected to find a lot of negative reviews on dollar stores. I thought, oh, people don't like dollar stores. There's low quality items. They're like kind of an eyesore. They're not the best. And I thought that at the end of my project, my message would be clear. Dollar stores are bad and we need to ban them. However, after I interviewed stakeholders and did some more research, I realized my view was wrong and I needed to rework my project. So I interviewed my grandma, who's a longtime Chama resident, and she actually told me she supported the store and told me how it's very convenient and it provides access to essential goods. Before there was a store in Chama, to get basic goods like toothpaste, towels, or any type of clothing, you'd either have to drive 2 to 3 hours to the closest Walmart or wait 5 days for something to be shipped here. And then when I asked her about, oh, what are the food options like in the dollar stores, she said she wasn't concerned about fresh food options, as there is a grocery store in their town. And she did note that the dollar store offers some perishables like milk. And her perspective just showed me that residents do rely on dollar stores, so they are beneficial to the community they serve. But it also showed me that they are unaware of the associated risk. This highlights both the benefits and drawbacks. She was unaware of the harm it causes the economy in their community and also the increased crime rates. And this was a common view in the community, as when the Dollar General was coming to town, only one resident of Chama opposed the new permit for the store, and his only concern was traffic and just stating that, oh, we don't need any more in our county. So for my project, I looked at multiple policy documents and other different types of documents that had statistics against dollar stores. And I analyzed how these documents communicate the risk of these dollar stores very clearly. So these documents would describe how each city took steps to pass these regulations. This looked like Cleveland, Ohio was able to restrict dollar store expansions when a community advocacy group called the Shaker Square Alliance brought attention to their city council member. So this just highlights that, oh, these communities need advocacy groups. And then these documents also listed reasons why a community would want to restrict the expansion of dollar stores in their community. For example, these statistics show that chain dollar stores have higher crime rates than any other store type and are linked to vandalism and violent crimes. Additionally, these documents highlighted you need to create a sense of urgency within the audience that the dollar store invasion requires action and regulations. So, for example, advocacy against dollar stores must be taken now, or they will continue to elbow out local businesses, diminish access to healthy food, and crush the prospect of prosperity and resilience within your community. So then I just highlighted what does good risk communication start with, and this starts with informing your community. The community needs to be aware of the different risks dollar stores pose, or else no action is going to be able to be taken. And so I looked at this website called the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. And this was just a really good website that educated communities on the risk of dollar store expansion, and it encourages local actions. And then this can lead to advocacy groups that can raise awareness through social media, community changes, and partnerships with local businesses and organizations. And so in the pictures below, there are two main articles that are just good examples of what good risk communication looks like and how to create local advocacy groups in your community. So then at the end of my project, I bring it back to Chama because that was my main focus, and what Chama needs to do to regulate the new stores and protect their community. So first, the Chama needs awareness and advocacy to regulate dollar stores. So the Chama community needs to understand the risk of dollar stores through local meetings. They need to form an advocacy group to inform the community and council members, just like we've seen in other communities. And they need to urge these council members to require dollar stores to allocate floor space for fresh food. I have two examples of Cleveland, Ohio, and Fort Worth who have successfully implemented regulations that regulate these dollar stores. They require new dollar stores to dedicate at least 15% of shelf space to fresh produce. So this eliminates the food insecurity risk, but there's still other regulations that need to be put in place to help protect local businesses and the increased crime. So my key takeaways from this research process and my findings was to write without bias and empathize with your audience and understand their perspective. So like I said, when I started this project, I really thought, oh, this is going to be easy. I'm just going to write about how we need to ban dollar stores in America. And then once I started interviewing stakeholders, I realized, oh no, like dollar stores are important to American citizens and the communities they serve. But there's regulations that we can put in place that can make them even more beneficial and have them do less harm than they currently are doing. And then also I recommend choosing a topic you're passionate about. Like I said, I was passionate about like food insecurity, and I had to narrow that down to just dollar stores. And I'm passionate about my grandparents and helping them. And so that's why I was able to find Chama, New Mexico, and as that's something that helps them directly. And then, as I've stated before, be open to changing your conclusion based on what you discover. There's so much research out there. You're really you don't know what you're going to end up saying at the end. So just be open to changing that. And then most importantly, enjoy the process. Thank you.
Just say, let me unmute and let's all give a round of applause to Parker for her, again, really interesting presentation. So hopefully I know somebody's already put one question in feel free to do that as you come up with them. Be sure to indicate who it's directed to, but we'll hold the questions until after Priscila has had a chance to share her presentation. So Priscila, let me go ahead and call on you if I may.
Yes. You should be able to see my presentation. I don't know if it's working or not.
Yeah, I don't see it yet. Jacob, yeah, so make sure that you actually have to kind of click twice on share. You gotta, when you click on the green button for share, highlight the thing you want to share, and then you gotta hit share again. So it's it's a multi-step process. So
Yeah. Let me just try again. No, on my end it says that I'm sharing.
let's see, for some reason it is not showing up. Priscila, if you want to drop it into the chat, then I could download it and share it for you. Potentially.
Yeah, I'll just do that. I don't know why. On my end it says that it's sharing, but I guess you guys don't see it.
No, I at least I don't. So and I see other people shaking their heads. So great. So great. Okay. I will download that.
It should be a link, so you should be able to
Yeah,
open it.
yes, absolutely. Yep. And oh, it's a Canva, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see what I can do to share it. Okay. I'm not sure that I will, let me see what I can do. Okay. So what are folks seeing? Are you seeing?
Yeah,
can see it.
it's sharing correctly.
Okay, got it. Okay. And let me see if I can get it to presenter view, but I'm not sure whether I'll be able to do that. Let me do this. And let me do this. And let me not do that. Let me do view. Well,
think
let's
you
just do
should-
it this way. So I'll just move
Okay,
the slides. You
should
tell me
have
when to move.
something. You should have something at the bottom. I think that little like two arrows should be the percent thing.
Okay, great. Let's see, I've got pages. There we
Yeah.
go. Yeah, good. Okay. And so you just tell me
Perfect.
when you want to move forward, and I will do that.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So my name is Priscila, and the title of my paper is The Hidden Cost, the Effect of Fast Fashion, but the title of my class was The Othering of Muslims Contemporary Diasporic Literature. So you might be able to tell that these kind of just by title don't really go hand in hand. But my professor, Professor Abbas, was very keen on us choosing something that we liked and that we were passionate about. So I am very passionate about fast fashion. So like I sat down and I researched on how I could connect both of these topics. And I basically landed on the fact that we talked about Southeast Asia, and a lot of the countries that are affected by fast fashion are actually in Southeast Asia. And one of the ones that was common in both our class and my project was Pakistan. So we could move on to the next slide. This is just a short introduction of what my presentation is going to look like, so we can move on. So what is fast fashion? Fast fashion is a business model in which garment and clothing factories produce trendy clothing. Thanks to their low prices, fast fashion can swiftly follow trends and capitalize on rapid shifts in consumer demand for clothing items. We can move on to the next slide. So these are all pictures. I'm gonna go through them one by one. So the first picture is actually what landfills look like with the clothes that people donate. Um, so because fast fashion is such a fast-growing, fast-paced business, people tend to donate their clothes a lot because they're trying to like get rid of their old clothes, or they just feel that their clothes isn't trendy enough. So when you donate clothes, most of those clothes just end up in a landfill. So that first picture showcases what landfills actually look like. The second picture is actually one of the nicer garment factories. A lot of the factories aren't this well lit, and they are a little bit more condensed. So people are closer together. And then the third picture is actually what clothes look like when they are being donated. So you donate your clothes, and that's like how they package them just so they could ship them. I know that one of the countries that clothes are shipped a lot is Haiti, because they are a poor country. But essentially these clothes just end up in a landfill because not all the clothes is going to be used. And then those two brands, H&M and Shane, or however you pronounce it, are the two biggest fast fashion brands currently. So the thesis of my project was fast fashion not only affects the environment and the economy, it also exploits the industry's workers due to the quick expansion of the industry. This is the result of the lack of knowledge consumers have, which leads to overconsumption. So before I start with this slide, fast fashion is a domino effect. So you'll see as we progress that the issues start or stem environmentally, and then they progress through labor concerns and economic effects as well. So as far as environmental effects, GMOs are believe it or not, an effect when talking about fast fashion. So farmers take the shortcut and use GMO cotton. Despite all the environmental concerns, these pesticides are absorbed by the soil, which not only affects the quality of the soil, it also travels to nearby water streams, affecting the quality of water. As far as GMO cotton, normally this is one of the highest produced GMO plant and seed. So a lot of cotton, especially the ones used for fast fashion, are GMO produced cotton. For consumption, the fast fashion industry contributes 8% of all carbon emissions and 20% of all global wastewater, with an anticipated 50% increase in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And again, these are rather concerning numbers. And then from 2007 to 2014, the amount of textile consumption increased, resulting in an additional 20.2 million tons to 90.8 million tons. So this was just the amount of waste, textile waste. And then as far as dyes and toxins, so lack of government oversight allows for waste to be disposed of or discharged irresponsibly. Again, countries like Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh are strongly affected by this. And an example of this dichotomy can be noted in Sanganer, India, where fast fashion clothing items are produced and dyes are released into rivers and streams, affecting the entire ecosystem and community that lives or depends on the water. So in this specific country, the residents do depend on this river to drink water or to use it for to bathe or just simply for their everyday lives. So they are essentially using contaminated water. Labor concerns. So for working conditions, large corporations choose to manufacture their products again in Southeast Asia because of the weak labor regulations. So workers often are required to endure 12-hour shifts. Though this might vary, some workers do only have 8-hour shifts, but again, it's uninterrupted 8-hour shifts. So they don't have any breaks at all. And the working conditions are really bad. So most of these places don't even have enough ventilation. So they're working in like really hot spaces, really condensed spaces. So it is not comfortable to work 8 hours with no break whatsoever. And then some factories do even employ underage children because there are no strict child labor laws. Over the years, the amount of child labor, specifically in fast fashion, has gone down, but this is still a recurring issue. And then apart from working conditions, you have the safety hazards. So workers face serious risks due to exhaustion and unsustainable working conditions. These workers earn very little wages. So they tend to work a lot and they don't really have any holidays or any days off because they, first of all, they can't afford it, and second of all, those things do not exist because of the lack of labor laws. So again, they go 8 to 12 hours without really eating anything. And then the buildings in which they work have little to no maintenance. And in 2013, there was a devastating accident in Bangladesh called the Rana Plaza collapse, where a garment factory collapsed and around 1,000 people were killed, while around 2,500 were injured. And for this specific event, the workers had already raised flags about the building's stay because they knew that something was off, but their bosses were quick to put it off and they were like they didn't really care. So they had to work, and sadly this was one of the biggest catastrophes and accidents involving fast fashion, and it was, if I believe not, one of the last as well. So fast fashion does ultimately affect the economy. So fast fashion perpetuates poverty in countries like Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh because workers earn wages that are often insufficient for a decent standard of living, keeping them below poverty thresholds despite their long working hours. And workers in Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan all earn as little as 71 cents an hour. And given that they only work 8 hours, they make around $113 a month. So again, these amounts are all converted to dollar quantities, but they are equivalent to the currency for each country. And even with the $113 a month, that is not enough to sustain the standard of living, and it is below the median of household income. And then monopolies. So like many industries, the garment industry operates as a monopoly. Since the government profits from the fast fashion industry, they have little incentive to eliminate garment factories. Yet while the government profits, these workers end up suffering. So many of these garment workers' children are forced to drop out of school because their parents are unable to pay their school fees, which just goes to show that whatever they earn really isn't enough to sustain their families. So most consumers are not aware of all the environmental and ethical issues surrounding fast fashion. In fact, many of these issues stem from this lack of knowledge that people have. So in interviews where college students' knowledge was tested regarding the negative effects of fast fashion, participants demonstrated limited understanding of the topic. So some of them knew what brands were fast fashion, but then most of them didn't really know what these effects are and all that's involved when it comes to fast fashion. So that just showcases that people, especially college students, don't really have a lot of knowledge on the effects of fast fashion. So for my conclusion, raising awareness through education campaigns, stricter regulations on labor practices, and promoting slow fashion alternatives are necessary steps towards a more sustainable future. And although it may not be possible to completely eliminate fast fashion since it is such a big part of the economy and of our lives, collective efforts from factories, consumers, and policymakers can significantly reduce its environmental and economic and ethical effects. And then as far as writing advice, do not limit yourself to a topic that aligns perfectly to the class. My topic is a clear example of this. You could look for something that you really like and you can make it align with the class, especially if it is backed up by research. It is okay to rewrite your paper, even close to deadlines. Just make sure that your paper reflects what you want to write, and that might mean not nailing it in your first try. I actually rewrote my paper relatively close to deadlines because I just realized that what I was writing wasn't going in the direction that I wanted to portray. So this is normal. If you are writing something and then it's not working out, please rewrite it. You are not going to regret it. So speak to your professor, to your library personnel, and use their writing center, because I use all of these things and they really, really helped me. Something else is that your reviews are really, really helpful because you get to listen from someone who's going through the same thing as you. So they're in the same boat, and you actually get to learn a lot, and you get to learn from their paper as well. So peer reviews were also really helpful, and just have fun in the process and make sure that you are passionate about your topic, because it will help you a lot and it will just make it easier for you to research. That was my paper.
Thank you so much, Priscilla, and let's give her a round of applause as well. So we really appreciate all three of the presentations, and now the floor is open for questions. And so we have a couple in the chat, and the first set are directed to Parker. So let me just take one of those, and this comes from I'm going to do Ralph Dannon. What made you want to focus specifically on dollar stores instead of other retail chains?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think when going into my project, I knew I wanted to focus on food insecurity. And then from there, my professor told me I needed to narrow it down. And so I knew that dollar stores do contribute to food insecurity because, like I've talked about, the lack of fresh produce and foods in there, and how they can push out dollar stores and how that contributes to food insecurity. And then a lot of the small communities I had in mind, like Trauma, they don't have other retail chains. They don't have like a Walmart, a Target, Costco, anything like that, or your retail grocery stores. It's all very local businesses. And so that's why I focused on dollar stores.
Great, thank you. And let's see, is it Sarah Fayazi who has your hand raised?
Hello, this is for Priscilla. Have there been like some initiatives that you found that were made to inform consumers about the issues and consumptions for that fast fashion brings to the economy and the environment as well?
Yeah, I didn't really find a specific initiative. One of the things that I know for a fact is like what people talk about is slow fashion, so thrift stores. Thrift stores are definitely tricky because um things still end up in landfills, especially those things that people like the thrift store can't sell. So I think that for starters, the biggest thing is definitely education and just kind of breaking those consumption cycles. But then as far as any organization that does this, I haven't really found any, and at least not in the DC area.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Let me, I have a question for Robert in the chat. And there's several actually. The Owen is asking Robert, because you did find a correlation between the density of SEZs relative to population and household income, what kinds of conclusions did you draw based on this information?
Yeah, specifically like that special economic zones can help at the household level. was the biggest thing, because you could see wide-ranging economic benefits. There's previous research on that. But I think the household things are really important, especially like even if you look in the United States, how much, the grocery bill, or like personal economics affects, people's feelings. So it could definitely also have a large effect for, politicians. So that's a pretty big conclusion, but also the conclusion that the economic benefits are generally equal between or there's benefits to both people who are higher earners and lower earners was definitely another big conclusion that I found in my research.
Great, thank you, thank you. Let's see, I think it's, Taiga, am I saying that correctly, Sarli?
Yes.
Your
I
hand is
was
up, yeah.
I was just wondering what for Parker, what responsibility do local governments have in like the regulation of the spread of dollar stores in small communities?
Yeah, are you asking like what can the local governments do?
Yeah, like can they help stop the spread or
Yeah. Well, so they can't like directly say you can't have a dollar store, but what they can do is like one of my examples say, oh, this new dollar store, if you come to town, 15% of your space has to be dedicated towards fresh food, fresh produce. They can also say, you can't be 2 miles within another dollar store, or you can't be 2 miles within an existing grocery store, because there are cases where dollar stores would come and set up their business right next to a grocery store to take over those customers. And then for the crime rates, I think that would just be something along the lines of you have to increase your security measures, maybe have a security guard or more employees, something like that. But there are examples of communities and governments that have implemented these regulations.
Thank you.
Great. Let's see. Another question. One is for Priscilla. Given that fast fashion's low prices depend on unsafe working conditions and poverty wages in countries like Bangladesh and India, how should responsibility for change be divided between corporations, consumers, and governments? And what real barriers exist to creating fairer labor systems without collapsing the industry?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest barrier for sure is the actual companies. Like you've probably heard in many places, money talks. So these big corporations come in and they offer the government money. And sadly, we live in a corrupt world where the government will take that money. So I feel that that is why education is so important. I feel like the real change starts with us as consumers. I think that it's important that we try our best, and I know that it's hard because believe me, I have started to do it, and almost every single thing is fast fashion. So it just starts with us um starting to lower our consumption, buying less clothes, buying maybe timeless pieces, even if it's a little bit more expensive, you know that it'll last a lot. So you're also reducing what goes into landfills. And again, while there are some corrupt governments and corrupt corporations, some corporations have actually started to take accountability for their actions, and they have slowly started to implement sustainability into their missions and into their companies. And obviously, some governments have started to create laws to kind of protect the workers. So most of the laws that are being made are more so for the workers and not for the environment. So it's obviously kind of a give and take, but it is something that will take a lot of time, and I do feel like us as consumers are the biggest advocates for this.
Thank you, Priscilla. Professor Richter, you have your hand up.
Yeah, well, so I have so many questions for these three really outstanding presentations, and they're all quite different. Priscilla, I'm curious. So I teach a UW themed around social media. I'm curious what role you think social media platforms and specifically TikTok Shop might play in fast fashion, because I think of TikTok Shop doing a really good but also harmful job of making purchasing fast fashion stuff super easy, frictionless, one click. It's at my doorstep a couple days later. It almost feels gamified. People get FOMO. Do you think TikTok Shop or other platforms are partly to blame?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like even sometimes because consumers don't have knowledge, they'll go ahead and they'll buy things and they don't even realize that it's fast fashion. And I do think that it is a big problem because you are on TikTok Shop and you are seeing all these things and you're trying to follow trends. And like that pressure of consumption definitely does affect fast fashion because sometimes you just buy things in the heat of the moment and then you're like, maybe I can't return this, or maybe I just didn't like it, and then that ends in a landfill. So I do think that it is a big factor, and I do think that those are the things that education might help with.
Great, thank you. And may I do a follow-up, Priscilla? Do you think that TikTok could also be used as one of the ways to educate people about it and that they could help to change the attitude?
Yes, definitely. One of my, if I'm not mistaken, one of my sources was actually a reel that I came across on Instagram, and it was an influencer. And she was just talking about how people will call her out because she would wear the same outfits all the time. And she made a video showcasing what landfills look like and why she goes ahead and uses the same clothes every time, showcasing all those negative effects of fast fashion. So I do think that TikTok is good for spreading awareness, but it also does go ahead and it does damage to us as consumers.
Great, thank you. Parker, this question comes from Jack and is in the chat. He asks, you made it very clear at the beginning that you went into the project under the impression that you would walk out with an extreme perspective on dollar stores. How were you able to get past that seemingly strong bias outside of the interview with your grandmother?
Yeah, I think it just happened throughout my research process. I was researching, how are these dollar stores affecting communities? And I wasn't seeing anything saying we need to outright ban these dollar stores. It was more we need to regulate. And so that made me take a step back and think, these dollar stores are benefiting the communities they are serving, but they're obviously also harming them, but there just needs to be that disconnect needs to be solved. And so it was really just through my research process that it all started to click together.
Great, thank you. Thank you. And that's, that kind of bias toward what we expect is so often a barrier to research. And so congratulations on working past that and being willing to open yourself up to follow the data and see what it really was telling you. Robert, I want to ask a question that Mackenzie Frick actually asked in the chat, which is what made you decide to explore your research through statistical tests, and how were you able to find your data?
So good question. For the first part, I took quantitative methods international affairs during my fall semester, so that kind of gave me a background on statistics. It's really pretty basic statistics that I used. That's one thing my teacher highlighted is, you don't need to do something crazy. It can be pretty simple. Just like even correlating two variables is pretty interesting. But I did learn about the software from that, so that's what made me kind of interested in doing this. And then as for where I got the data, again, it's a little bit hard to find data. And luckily for me, the Philippines has pretty good government provided data. So one's, I believe, the Philippines Economic Authority, and then they also have the Philippines Statistic Authority. And on their websites, they release pretty good data on special economic zones, economic census data. But it's definitely something you kind of need to like search a decent bit for. So I'd say if you're looking for data, just be willing to, take the time to find it. Yeah, that would be the big thing there.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. Let me ask another question of Parker. Paulina Urbietas asks that Valerie Weiss, your grandmother, emphasized convenience and access to essentials as reasons to support the dollar store. What does her perspective reveal about how community members weigh short-term benefits against long-term social or economic risks?
Yeah, I think her perspective reveals that this community focused on short-term benefits. And I think mainly that's because of it's a very low income community. Like their annual income averages at about $28,000. So they can't really afford to think about the long-term social or economic risk. They create a budget to go grocery shopping. So They can't decide, oh, I'm gonna go to the local grocery store because I want to contribute to my local economy. They have to think about where can they get the most bang for their buck, and that often leads them at the dollar store instead.
Great, thank you. Let's see. I've got so many great questions that are in the chat. Let's see. Here's a really interesting question from Claire Lewis for Priscilla. Do you know if donating clothes to homeless shelters lowers the risk of them ending up in landfills rather than somewhere like Goodwill?
Yeah, so I would say that yes and no. It depends on the amount of clothes that these homeless shelters receive. If it's a homeless shelter that doesn't really receive a lot of donations, then it most likely will not end up in a landfill. But if it is a homeless shelter that does receive a lot of donations, then it will most likely end up in a landfill. Something that I tend to do is that I go ahead and I clean out my closet and I contact all of my friends, or I pick certain things that I know someone else could use. So I would say that giving clothing to specific people does help things not ending up in landfills. So definitely homeless shelters could help a little bit lower the risk, because some of them will actually use all the clothes. But then again, you always run that risk of them just ending up in a landfill just because they didn't use it.
Great, thank you. Professor Richter, I see your hand again.
Yeah, so my question is for Robert. I noticed that some of your data looks like it's from 2020 and 2021. I'm curious, do you think that like COVID might have impacted that data? And I'm curious how special economic zones weathered the storm, so to say. Obviously, most things did not weather that storm very well.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it reminds me, it's actually something I think I brought up during my, final presentation. And unfortunately, I don't have like a super duper good answer, but I can say, although my data was close together, which is at least good, I believe the household economic data was from 2021. So, you have the year after. And I think it does raise some good questions, especially because after 2020, you saw a drop in GDP, actually your GDP fell year over year from 2019. So it's definitely, what were the economic impacts of that? And then also I'd say, there was global supply chain issues as well that oftentimes these are trying to attract foreign investment, perhaps, manufacturing investment. So perhaps it would be a really good question to answer, especially if they're like more of an export-based special economic zone. How is that affected, especially with the supply chain issues? We saw boats queuing up outside of, harbors in California and whatnot. So I think that's definitely also a good place for further research. And also, again, a limiting factor that most likely had at least some impact on the data.
Great. Well, thank you, Robert, for that answer. And let me again thank all three of our presenters who really did a marvelous job of looking at some very interesting economic topics and thinking about the visible hand as opposed to the invisible hand in economics. So let's give our presenters a round of applause. And let me also ask Professor Richter if there is anything you'd like to say to the folks about the rest of the conference and how they can participate.
Yeah, folks, we have another session starting again at 8:30, so 15 minutes, same Zoom link. Consider coming. And, thank you to our moderator. We very much appreciate your time and expertise. Great panel. Love hearing your presentation.
Absolutely. So thank you very much. Everybody have a good rest of the conference, and I hope you'll stay tuned for the next session. So thank you all very much. And to each of our presenters, again, thank you very much for sharing your research and really providing some food for thought about ways that we can engage with the world as well. So thank you very much.